In 2026, the ultra-rich aren't just buying mansions, they're buying a way out of the apocalypse. In Hawaii, billionaires and major family offices are advising ultra-high net worth investors to diversify by expanding into properties with underground structures, cutting-edge private security systems, and a level of capital and data protection that feels straight out of a military facility. And New Zealand is still seen by part of the global elite as the ideal refuge if the world above ground collapses. Today, you'll discover that this obsession with digging deep, sealing the entrance, and waiting for the chaos to pass did not begin with paranoid millionaires surrounded by concrete, sensors, and helicopters. But what if I told you the idea of abandoning the surface completely and building an entire society underground already existed many centuries ago? And not as a bunker for one wealthy family, but as an inverted metropolis carved into stone, capable of hiding and sustaining a population of up to 20,000 people with water, food, animals, shared spaces, and organized defense. That city exists in Cappadocia, in what is now Turkey, and its name is Derinkuyu. Long before modern empires dreamed of bunkers, the ancient Phrygians, a people of Indo-European origin from the Iron Age, known for their resilience and pioneering spirit in Anatolia, set in motion the construction of this monumental feat. And when you understand how it was planned over generations by those ancestral peoples, one unsettling truth becomes clear. Technology changes, empires change, fears take on new names. But the human instinct in the face of collapse keeps driving everyone toward the same answer. So subscribe to the channel right now, because today we're going to prove that the true barriers between life and death have always been the invisible structures. And tell me this, if the world above you started falling apart today, would you trust your life to what lies underground? For centuries, Derinkuyu remained hidden, as if the Earth itself wanted to erase its existence. Then, in 1963, history changed because of a bizarre detail. A local resident noticed that his chickens were disappearing for no reason. They were slipping through a small crack in the basement wall and never coming back. Intrigued, he decided to break through the stone structure to investigate. What he found on the other side was no ordinary hole. It was a dark tunnel leading to an entire layered metropolis buried underground. This is where the story stops being curious and starts to feel impossible. Derinkuyu was carved into the volcanic tuff of Cappadocia, a rock soft enough to be shaped with simple tools, yet stable enough to support vast internal voids when cut in ways that respected the logic of the material. The Phrygians, around the 8th and 7th centuries before Christ, were the first to unlock and master this extreme geology, opening the earliest underground halls. In other words, digging was not enough. They had to understand the stone, and the scale of the project destroys any notion of an improvised shelter. We are not talking about 2 or 3 hidden chambers. We are talking about a subterranean system with multiple connected levels, narrow passageways, storage areas, stables, wells, communal rooms, and shared-use spaces. It is like taking a high-rise building, turning it upside down, and burying the whole thing inside a mountain. And do not picture a chain of empty holes. Derinkuyu was organized like a real city. Descriptions of the site mention stables, storage rooms, wine cellars, areas for pressing wine and oil, dining halls, chapels, and even a large space associated with religious instruction. In other words, this was not just a place to hide. It was a place to keep existing. While the surface became a threat, life underground had to preserve routine, food, worship, work, and order. That is what transforms Derinkuyu from a shelter into a civilization compressed inside stone. But without concrete, without drills, without engines, without cranes. The first question is unavoidable. How did it not collapse? The answer lies in the geometric intelligence of the design. The tunnels are narrow because that helps with structural resistance. The chambers were not opened at random. They respected the limits of the rock. The entrances may look tight and even confusing to modern eyes, but that protected the structure and also made it harder for invaders to move through it. Now comes an even harsher question. How do you remove thousands of tons of debris without machinery? The only plausible answer is continuous, disciplined, collective labor generation after generation. A body of knowledge inherited from the Phrygians and expanded to the extreme by Christians of the Byzantine era centuries later, turning temporary shelters into an impenetrable fortress 18 levels deep. Material was removed by hand, corridor by corridor, through a patient logistics system that now feels almost impossible to imagine. Every yard carved out demanded effort, planning, and calculation. Because the true purpose of this engineering was not merely to shelter, but to conceal and protect the most valuable asset of all: life. That detail changes everything. Derinkuyu does not seem to have been built on impulse. It feels like the result of a culture that already understood that survival demanded thinking like an engineer. And maybe that is exactly why it feels so unsettling. Because a modern bunker tries to protect wealth. Derinkuyu was trying to protect an entire population. And when an ancient society can carve a whole vertical city into stone and still make it work, we are not just looking at ruins. We are looking at one of the greatest demonstrations of invisible structural intelligence in history. But digging is one thing. Making thousands of people live down there without suffocating, without losing access to water, and without being discovered is a very different story. Now the city stops looking like just a massive excavation and starts to feel like an organism, because an underground city has to breathe. That was the fatal problem of any shelter below ground. The more people went inside, the faster the oxygen disappeared, the heat rose, and the humidity turned protection into a trap. But Derinkuyu was designed precisely to overcome that limit. The complex had deep ventilation shafts, with channels distributing air through different levels. Instead of relying on a single opening, the city spread its breath through multiple points, as if it had lungs carved into the stone. That may be the best image for understanding Derinkuyu, not as an ordinary bunker, but as a subterranean body. The shafts worked like airways, the corridors like arteries, the storage areas like organs of survival. Each level had a function, and everything had to work together. Water was another decisive challenge. In times of danger, surface sources could be controlled or poisoned. That is why the water system was also part of the defensive strategy. It was not enough to have water. It had to be protected in the dark. And here comes a detail so distrustful, it feels almost genius. Some wells were not connected directly to the surface in the most obvious way. That helped prevent invaders from contaminating the water, or taking control of the supply during a siege. Do you see the level of planning? They were not just thinking about how to drink underground. They were thinking about how to keep drinking even when someone outside tried to turn water into a weapon. That is bunker thinking in its purest form. And then we reach the element that turns caution into architectural paranoia: the doors. Derinkuyu had enormous circular stone doors, heavy and thick, placed at strategic points to block internal passageways. And here is the brilliant detail. They could be locked only from the inside. But the brilliance did not stop there. Records on Derinkuyu indicate that sections and levels could be sealed off separately. That means the entire city functioned like a sequence of defensive capsules. If one level were compromised, another could still be closed. If one corridor were discovered, another remained secure. It was not just a hidden city. It was a city designed to resist in layers, as if each floor were a vault inside another vault. In other words, even if someone found an entrance, they would still face narrow corridors and successive stone barriers that completely favored the people in hiding. It is practically an ancestral vault door. Think about the psychological effect of that. On the surface, an invader sees a dark opening. Inside, the population has a chain of barriers capable of isolating entire sectors of the city. It is as if each level could become an independent fortress within a matter of seconds. This is exactly where Derinkuyu connects with modern bunkers and the mega-project real estate developments we see around the world. Not in luxury, not in the finish, but in the mindset: compartments, redundancy, access control now managed by artificial intelligence tools, and complete faith in the protective power of invisible structures to shield not only lives, but digital and physical assets of immense value. If the genius of building an impenetrable stone vault dozens of meters underground impresses you, this is the perfect moment to leave a like on the video. That helps invisible structures keep uncovering the hidden engineering of our planet. Now let us understand who exactly they were running from. To understand why Derinkuyu existed, you need to see it as a strategic response, not as a cultural eccentricity. The region of Cappadocia, in Anatolia, occupied a sensitive position for centuries between great powers, trade routes, and zones of military pressure. It was a land of passage, of dispute, of advance and retreat. A true corridor of tension, where the political map could change far too quickly for the people living there. In places like that, the surface stops being safety and becomes exposure. That is why the most intense use of these underground cities is associated with recurring threats. When the risk increased, the population could simply vanish from the visible landscape. Now, picture the scene. And this is not just a modern interpretation. UNESCO itself states that in later periods, communities in Cappadocia gathered in rock-cut villages and underground cities like Derinkuyu to resist invasions. That detail matters because it shows the underground was not an architectural whim. It was a regional survival strategy. When life on the surface became too unpredictable, the answer was not to flee far away. It was to disappear in the very same place, turning the landscape itself into a trap for whoever came from outside. Now picture the scene. On the surface, signs of a military advance, urgency, fear. And just as modern real estate investors seek secure refuges against instability, that entire population vanished from the visible landscape. People, animals, grain, water, tools, and reserves disappeared from sight. When the army arrived, it found a city that seemed empty. No crowds. No open resistance. No clear target. But life had not ended. It had simply gone below. That may be the most brilliant aspect of Derinkuyu's intelligence. A wall displays strength. A castle shows power. Derinkuyu does the exact opposite. It does not confront the enemy with weapons. It wins the war by disappearing. The people's greatest defense was, quite literally, to become an invisible structure. And that required more than carved stone. It required supplies, discipline, controlled circulation, rational use of water, routine, and silence. In other words, the hideout worked only because an entire community was prepared for it. An ancient protocol of collective survival. Now, I want to open this discussion with you. Do you think an invisible city like this would still be one of the smartest forms of defense today? And write in the comments what city and state you are watching from, because I want to see where this community is coming from that sees the world beyond the surface. But the most unsettling part still lies in its reflection in the present. Because when we place Derinkuyu beside modern bunkers, it becomes clear that technology has changed, but human fear remains disturbingly similar. In the end, Derinkuyu forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. When humanity feels that the world on the surface has become too unstable, it digs. Empires change, threats change, the narratives change. Back then, it was invasions, sieges, and regional wars. Today, the imagination is filled with climate crises, nuclear risk, social collapse, and technological anxiety. But the reflex remains the same: protect air, water, and food, and turn the underground into a continuation of life. That is what makes Derinkuyu the perfect essence of what we call invisible structures. It proves that the most impressive engineering is not always born to be seen or applauded. Sometimes it is born to disappear, to function in silence, to keep thousands of people alive when everything above seems ready to fail. And maybe that is why the comparison with Billionaire's bunkers feels so inevitable. Major funds look at these shelters as the last line of defense for capital and cybersecurity. They may have specialized concrete, armor, artificial intelligence sensors, private reserves, and escape routes. But deep down, they repeat an ancient impulse. Fear changes its clothing. The solution remains the same: dig. But there is one decisive difference. Derinkuyu does not seem to have been designed to save one isolated individual in comfort. It was conceived to protect an entire community. And that forces us to look at today's millionaire shelters and ask, when collapse comes, who exactly is being saved? So I want to close with a question. Would you have the courage to spend weeks or even months locked inside an underground city like Derinkuyu, without sunlight, without a horizon, and without knowing what is happening out there? Write it in the comments. Now here comes the most important invitation. If you believe content like this deserves to keep existing with depth, atmosphere, and respect for your intelligence, use the Super Thanks button. Because that support is not just help, it is a direct way of telling the channel. Keep digging deeper. Keep revealing what almost no one shows. And of course, subscribe to Invisible Structures. Because here, we do not just look at what was built. We reveal what moves the world in the shadows.